Hey everyone, welcome back. My name's Dustinkreis, and today we're going to do what is surprisingly kind of a hard video to do. If you watched my Secret Santa video, you heard me kind of talk about this video, and it's talking about the original Star Wars trilogy. And I've been doing did a big marathon getting ready for The Force Awakens. Already did my video for the prequel trilogy. Did my video for my thoughts on The Force Awakens, which after seeing it a second time, it only got better. And I've been kind of struggling with this video for various reasons. The holiday season, being busy, some other things, and just the mere fact that talking about the prequels, I was able to sort of give my critique on why I thought they're not as bad. Whereas with the original trilogy of the Star Wars movies, it's really just me kind of gushing about how good these movies are, how good the saga is. And, there's a reason why Star Wars is so popular. The original three movies, people kind of debate back and forth which one's the best. Is Return of the Jedi terrible because of the Ewoks and all that jazz? But for me, it's one of those kind of perfect trilogies, right up there with like Back to the Future and like the Mad Max. Well, now it's the Mad Max quadrology, but it was a trilogy at one point in time. But anyway, my history with this series began back in the 80s. On a VHS tape. My uncle had HBO, and he recorded, or one of the movie channels, I can't remember if it was exactly HBO, but he recorded A New Hope and all the movies. He recorded them on VHS, and we had all three movies on one VHS tape. Yeah, because you could slow it down and put like, I don't know how many, like 8 hours on one VHS tape or something. But anyway, it was either Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back were on one VHS tape recorded, and then Return of the Jedi was on another one, or they were all on one. I can't really remember because as we are talking like about, I don't know, 25 years ago. Yeah, that's how I saw this movie series for the first time. I never got to see them in the theaters until the special editions came out. Yeah, I just remember watching these movies, and my brother and I would go out and we'd grab sticks in the yard and play as Jedi and things like that. And then of course, in like 95 ish, the toys started to come back out again, the Power of the Force figures and the Micro Machines, and just getting ready for the special editions to come out. And the Star Wars bonanza has never really let down since then. But yeah, these movies, they hold a really, really big place in my heart. And it's kind of hard to just sit here and kind of find faults with them. There are things that I don't like, not that I don't like, but that, kind of, I'm like, wow, it's weird when you watch A New Hope, and in comparison to the other movies, not all that much happens. It's kind of weird how that's a very small storyline compared to all the other movies, which makes sense because it was the first one. It was made on a shoestring budget, and yeah, but it's interesting going back and kind of, if you watch them 1 through 3 and then 4, 5, and 6, you get to the end of 3 and then you get ready to watch 4, and it's kind of, 4 is a very slow movie. It's amazing kind of how slow A New Hope is compared to the other films, especially compared to the prequels. But that's just a different era of filmmaking, Things in the 80s could breathe a little bit for some reason, whereas like the prequels, every frame has to be packed with, some kind of action. And, kind of maybe to a smaller extent, The Force Awakens is kind of that way too, where it felt like every frame was just packed with something, and there wasn't these little quiet moments like there were in the originals. But that might just be sort of my nostalgia talking or something like that. But it all began with, which was originally called just Star Wars, and then eventually became Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope. The story of Luke Skywalker setting off on his journey. And, you get to meet the evil Darth Vader for the first time, and hear about this grand war between the Galactic Empire and this little rebellion. And you kind of have to wonder how the rebellion is able to do it, because the Empire just has so many resources at their disposal. And every time you kind of see the rebellion, it's just this ragtag little group that, are keeping their ships together with, duct tape and bubble gum. It's really kind of an amazing feat, and it's kind of that historic story trope of the underdog, overtaking the big bad. But yeah, so many things, so many weird things about this movie. Which part of the problem with the movie is the special editions. I think out of all of the special editions, this is the one that has the most added stuff to it. And that's simply just because, the special effects weren't as good, things got better. They wanted to kind of spruce things up a little bit. But, some very weird things happen, which kind of have been corrected with the Blu-rays. I don't have the Blu-rays yet, but the whole thing with Han shooting first, of course Han should have shot first. At this point in time in the storyline, he is a scoundrel. He is kind of a bad guy, a pirate. He does, bad things. And then Lucas kind of got weak in the knees about it and said, I don't really want Princess Leia ended up with a guy that just kills people. But that's who he was. And through the interaction with Luke Skywalker and the rebellion, becomes this heroic character, and it kind of changes. And, in the Blu-rays, they kind of make it look like they're shooting at the same time. But definitely in the DVDs and in the VHSs, it's definitely Greedo shoots first and then Han shoots. And, I guess, he's still kind of a badass guy, but I always liked that Han just blew Greedo away without any provocation and just kind of walked out like, oh well, that's the price of doing business. And it never bothered me as a kid. And it's kind of the same thing with like E.T., where they replaced all the police officers, all their shotguns with radios, which I think they might have switched it back by now. But watching movies in the 80s, it was almost like the kids' movies didn't talk down the kids, with like Goonies and the Monster Squad and things like that. Kids kind of knew that the world was a little dangerous, and it's like now everything is so padded gloves that it's so sterile. There's no sense of danger in films anymore, especially for like kids. I don't think you'd ever get a movie like The Goonies made today with all the kids, saying shit and all that kind of stuff. I don't think that would happen in today's culture, which is really weird and really kind of sad. But yeah, I always liked Han shooting first, and I think Lucas, robbed Han of a little bit of character development by changing how that goes. The other thing I have a problem with in this film is Luke's lightsaber. When he first ignites it, originally it was kind of a white color. And then when they did some color correcting for this release, the blade is actually green. And it's like, why would you even let that pass? Who did that, and why aren't they fired? And if they are fired, good. But then for the Blu-rays, I believe they did color key it back to the blue color. But it's just one of those things where it's like, you're so used to seeing the film, and then to see that kind of to jump out at you is a weird thing. And then there's just a bunch of like unnecessary CG just to kind of, I guess, test the waters for the prequels. The whole Mos Eisley sequence. I watched a thing comparing the original scenes to the special editions, and there's just so many additional scenes to just hammer home that Mos Eisley is bigger than the physical set that they built for the movie. We get it. We know. The movie. It's almost in a way the special editions are weird, because it's almost like George Miller going back and like the Road Warrior and changing the Road Warrior to make it look like Fury Road with like all the CG backgrounds and things like that. they really should just leave these films alone. If it doesn't jive perfectly with the prequels, that's fine. You can kind of explain that stuff away. You don't need to, oh God, Boba Fett's voice is different in the original trilogy, and in the prequels we have him played by this character. We have to go back and change Boba Fett's voice. Like, no one is going to care. Look at the Harry Potter movies. I mean, Richard Harris died after the Chamber of Secrets, and they brought Michael Gambon in, and no one batted an eye. They're just like, okay, that's the way it is. Partly, maybe part of the problem is the internet and creating these like continuity hounds and things like that. But remember, these are just movies, and these movies were made in flipped order and, like almost 20 years apart. So, there's going to be some discrepancies. But to go back and change the originals to fix those discrepancies is kind of a weird thing. But at the same point in time, there is some of the special edition stuff that I actually do like. I like that I like how the Battle of the Death Star feels a lot more punchy with a lot more of the shots, because the model, the filming of the models wasn't quite there yet to do a really good dogfight. Don't get me wrong, the original scenes look good, but there is something about the way the new ships look in the special editions I find to be a bit better. But yeah, episode 4, I mean, introduced us to so many things, even hinted at things that we wouldn't get to see for a long time. The battle between Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, or not Luke Skywalker, between Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi, that happened to turn Darth Vader into Darth Vader, the Clone Wars, all these little bits and pieces that, just inform the backstory. They don't go into explaining it, explain like what things are and, stuff like that. Sometimes like the Harry Potter movies do a little bit too much of that, explaining the backstory instead of just letting your mind wander, because I remember hearing about the Clone War in this and just thinking to myself how like mythic and just epic the Clone War sounded. And then once you get to the prequels and kind of watch the prequels, it kind of took some of the magic away from the Clone War in a way to actually see it. Whereas when it was just kind of mentioned and then just let go, your mind sort of wandered as to like what the Clone War actually was and things like that. So a lot of interesting things to sort of build up this world. One of the great movies to do world building. I mean, when you get done with this movie, I mean, you really feel like everything, even without it being hammered home and explained, everything is explained extremely well. So, yeah, I mean, there are things that I find not wrong, but just a little disappointed with A New Hope. But then I remember this was the first movie done on a shoestring budget by a director who had only directed 2 films and nothing on this scale. And you can kind of forgive the weaknesses and then really appreciate the craft of this movie. You really just kind of, I mean, in some ways, you look at it and you're like, oh, that's really low budget. Oh man, you can see like the pieces of these Stormtrooper armor falling off and things like that. But then you sort of think about the scale of like the Sandcrawler and the whole idea of the story itself, which basically, A New Hope is kind of a take on the Akira Kurosawa movie, A Hidden Fortress. And you can kind of see the parallels. Once you watch A Hidden Fortress, you see a lot of the parallels and stuff, and how, instead of samurai, you have Jedi, and, instead of the bumbling duo in A Hidden Fortress, you have R2-D2 and C-3PO. And you just see all these little parallels and things, and you really, it's kind of like when they took Seven Samurai and made the Magnificent Seven. It's kind of the same type of thing where it's like you take someone's work and you kind of reinterpret it in a different way and add your own spin on it, and it becomes this huge, colossal giant. Really, really impressive. And to have things like these iconic figures, like, we're so used to seeing Darth Vader, right? But to think of a time before Darth Vader was in the public consciousness and seeing that guy for the first time, what must that have been like, Just astounding film. And of course it's spawned this whole empire, there's no bigger compliment than to say that. But then they did the impossible. This mega multi-million-dollar making movie that just took the world by storm. They went back and told a further story and expanded on the story and improved the story and improved everything about the first movie. And it's still probably the best movie in the series, and that is The Empire Strikes Back. Man, this just did everything that Star Wars A New Hope did, and did it so much better. The opening battle on Hoth is just astounding. Like, you just sitting there, like, as a kid I remember watching it thinking, my god, these ships are going so fast and everything is, this is just looks great and it's so action packed. And then as an adult, when I was getting into like my film editing classes and things like that, and you realize that at the time and the technology level of doing green screen model, you know, motion capture shots on a snowfield, and how incredibly difficult it had to be to get all those black matte lines out of there. It's really a real technical marvel of a film. Just that opening Hoth sequence alone. And then you get more into the backstory of Darth Vader, and more into the training of Luke Skywalker, and you meet Yoda, and more of sort of the backstory of the Jedi, and the Han and Leia love story, which is really the heart of not only this movie, but it's the heart of the entire trilogy. You know, they had a very antagonistic relationship in the first film, whereas the second one, it's still antagonistic because that's kind of because both of them don't want to admit, you know, how they feel for each other until that very last, you know, scene where they see each other, and the I love you and the I know, and then, you know, it's just an amazing, amazing film. Takes everything that the first film did, expands upon it, and it doesn't do the thing that I feel most sequels do, because you have to remember, Star Wars, maybe Lucas had an idea in his head for a sequel, but it wasn't like, you know, it is now where they make a movie and they're already planning on making the sequels to it. You know, like when they made Episode 1, A Phantom Menace, they knew that Episode 2 and 3 were going to come. You know, not so much for the first Star Wars movie, but I feel like every other movie that's a single movie, like The Matrix, that gets turned into, or Pirates of the Caribbean, that gets turned into a trilogy, kind of a false trilogy in a way. It was never really designed to be a trilogy, but they just kind of, you know, hey, this is successful, let's do another one. When it gets to the second one, like, the world expands so much that it loses sight of like the original feeling of the storyline. You know, The Matrix was such a weird movie, and then like by the time the second movie came around, it felt so commonplace, and it robbed it in some ways of some of the mystery of the movie. I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing like that, where sometimes sequels expand the world in a good way, and sometimes they expand it and it just robs it of the mystery and the magic. But Empire Strikes Back somehow completely like dodges that bullet, and it not only, you know, doesn't ruin things, it actually enriches everything. Especially when you get to that last lightsaber duel between Luke and Vader. And you know, in the prequels, we got really used to the fast and fluid combat of the Jedi, and after watching The Force Awakens, like going back to that, it's kind of like watching cartoon characters flip around, because Force Awakens kind of takes it back to that more slow-paced, brutal fighting that we're used to in the original trilogy. And yes, the lightsaber duel in Empire Strikes Back is pretty slow, but at the same time, there's so much atmosphere in that Bespin, you know, carbonite facility, and there's so much tension, and you know Luke's not ready for this, you know, and you know, not now or not then, but now, you know, it's the second part of a trilogy. You know he can't beat Vader, because then there wouldn't be a third movie. You know this is going to end badly, and it does end badly, and it ends very badly. Luke loses his hand, finds out Vader's his father, and gets the crap kicked out of him. And it's such a weird note for a film to end on, because you know, all the other, except for Revenge of the Sith, all of the other Star Wars movies kind of end on this very hopeful note. The award ceremony at the end of A New Hope, of course, at the end of Return of the Jedi, you have all the Empire's dead. Episode 1, kind of the same thing, the parade and everything. Episode 2 ends with Anakin and Padme getting married, but, while it's kind of a happy ending, at the same time, it's got an ominous feeling to it. But then Revenge of the Sith, of course, has a very bittersweet ending because, on the one hand, everything's gone to shit. But then it ends with Beru and Owen holding Luke, looking into the binary sunset, and you know what's coming. And it still kind of fills you with hope. But Empire Strikes Back, man, it ends on such a down note. Luke's frozen in carbonite, or not Luke, Han's frozen in carbonite. Luke's got his hand cut off and just got the crap kicked out of him by Vader, who happens to be his father. And the rebellion through the entire course of the movie has just had the snot kicked out of it, basically pushing them into a corner, which facilitates Return of the Jedi. But it's such a weird movie because in one way it has no beginning, it has no end. It kind of begins where the first one left off, it ends where the third one begins. But it doesn't ever feel like filler. It doesn't feel like just a bridge movie, like kind of like The Matrix Reloaded did. The Matrix Reloaded kind of really felt like, okay, this movie only exists to get us to the third part. In some ways, Back to the Future Part 2 feels that way too. Like, it's just to get us from Back to the Future 1 to Back to the Future 3. You need that bridge story to get you to the two beginning and end points. But Empire Strikes Back, you can sit and watch on its own and maybe not know everything, but it's still a very entertaining film in its own right. And just the darker atmosphere and the expanding of the movie's world, but not so much to a point where it starts to ruin things. It doesn't, again, much like the problem with the prequels is I feel like it over-explains everything. Whereas the original trilogy doesn't over-explain anything. It just says, this is the way it is, we move on. Because the characters, the characters in the movie are aware of the rebellion and the Empire, and to a lesser extent, the myths of the Jedi and things like that. And there's no point where people are like, midichlorians? What are that? Well, young man, let me tell you what midichlorians... there's none of that expository crap. And that's part of the reason why Mad Max Fury Road was such an amazing film. Because it showed you its world, and you got a feel for it, and maybe you didn't understand why everything was a certain way, but it still made sense within that world, and didn't have to be just ridiculously beat to death. You know what I mean? So, again, Star Wars expands, or Empire Strikes Back expands and enriches everything that came before it, and brings us to the third part of the trilogy, which some people debate this is where things for Star Wars began to slide. I still really love Return of the Jedi. Watching it back here recently, I was really keeping an eye out for one thing, and the one thing was, do the Ewoks really ruin this picture? Is it so hard to believe that the Ewoks could beat the Empire? And it's actually interesting when you think about the Empire, because here's this military force. How do they keep control of the entire universe if these little teddy bears can beat them? And that's kind of the argument that people use against Return of the Jedi. But at the same point, you kind of get the sense that the Empire just, wins its battles through sheer numbers as opposed to any sort of tactical advantage. When you get to the First Order in Force Awakens, they feel a lot more able to handle themselves. Whereas the Stormtroopers in Star Wars, this is not the clone army from the prequel trilogy. These are conscripts and volunteers and things like that. I lost my train of thought. But anyway, you kind of get the sense that Stormtroopers kind of bumble around in the original trilogy. And part of that is because the costumes they were wearing were a little bit prohibitive in terms of seeing where you're going, and just their, just their make, their build quality in general. So it kind of gives this sense that the Empire just throws these stormtroopers at things, sort of in a cannon fodder fashion, and just, defeats things through its sheer overpowering weaponry, which, Star Destroyers and Death Stars and things like that. But also just sheer numbers. Just keep throwing waves and waves of troops, and eventually the enemy will just, give up, or you'll, beat them by, just sheer numbers. And that's kind of how I feel about, or how I'm able to explain their defeat on Endor, is that, they didn't really have a huge force down there to deal with this problem, and the Ewoks are used to fighting on their home turf, and there is such a thing as home court advantage. And the stormtroopers, even though they are more advanced, and you can even look in history, even though an enemy is more advanced, the terrain and the knowledge of the terrain can help hugely with a battle. So I really don't have a hard time believing that the Ewoks could defeat this regiment of stormtroopers on Endor. And I really don't feel like they ruin the movie. Now, I do know that I think Lucas was kind of arm twisted into putting them in the film because they wanted to sell toys and, these cute little teddy bear type things. Those things will sell. I had one when I was a kid. I had an Ewok plushie that was about that big, had a hood. I even liked watching Battle for Endor. I think that was the name of it, Battle for Endor, on TV. Or maybe I rented it from the video store. I can't remember. But, when I was a kid, I loved the Ewoks. And then I think as you grow older and you get jaded and you're like, oh, these stupid teddy bears, they wouldn't be able to beat the Empire. And you kind of lose that suspension of disbelief and that movie magic. And you start putting like adult thought processes to it. And some people did that with the Starkiller base in Force Awakens, well, they only got 2 shots with that sun, because I think the thought process was they were in a binary star system because they were able to shoot the weapon off, or at least try to, twice. And but then there's information out that planet can actually move. So while it wasn't stated in the movie, it is stated in sort of the I guess the extra stuff about the making of the movie. The planet can move, so there is a reason for that. But it's just, any chance people can find to nitpick something apart, they will. And I think that's part of the problem with the Ewoks, is that they've just been nitpicked to death. But really, I mean, my problem with Return of the Jedi is the opening bit. You spend way too much time on Tatooine, like way too much time on Tatooine. That whole sequence with Jabba the Hutt is just way too long. It just goes on forever. And then George Lucas made it even longer by putting in that dance number, which, like I said, I don't really have a problem with a lot of the additions in the original trilogy. But man, that song and dance number is a bit hard to get through. It just serves no purpose. It doesn't, do anything for the storyline. It's just kind of there to show off, hey, we can do this with CG characters, which we were going to get a couple years later anyway with Jar Jar Binks. So I don't understand, really its addition, because it doesn't enhance the storyline any. Whereas, like in A New Hope, the addition of the Jabba scene kind of does expand the storyline a little bit, because up until then, Jabba is just kind of this name. You don't really have a face to go along with it. And by putting that scene back in there, you can kind of see that, the relationship between Han and Jabba, and kind of get, an idea of it, of, how perilous this actually is for Han to owe this guy money. But, we're just way too long on Tatooine, and I don't know. By the time, Luke's there and he pulls out his new green lightsaber, things are better. But it's just like, oh my god, how long do we have to stay in Jabba's palace? And then, once that happens, things get off to a brisk pace. Luke goes back to Dagobah. Then he goes to, the rebellion. And then we're off to Endor. Kind of like A New Hope, there's not a lot of locations in this film. You really only go to 3 planets. But once you get on Endor, I really like everything that happens on Endor. I like the speeder. I mean, the speeder bike chase is amazing. Once Luke gets captured by the Empire, or turns himself in. Let's put it that way, and gets whisked away, and we have that amazing, just tension-filled lightsaber battle in front of the Emperor. Finally, get to see the Emperor and realize just what an asshole he is. Until you get to the prequels, and then you realize, yeah, he is really an asshole. But yeah, I mean, just everything about Return of the Jedi, I do like, and I think people are a little harsh on it, because it's supposedly the weak link of the original trilogy. It's definitely a much better movie than Episode 1 and Episode 2. I think I might give the edge to Revenge of the Sith, but that's just me. That's my personal opinion. I really like Revenge of the Sith, and I saw some comments on my prequel video that was like, really, you like it that much? And yeah, I mean, I kind of do. I think when you if you look at it objectively and hold it up, I think it does stand with the original trilogy pretty well. But yeah, and after watching these again and then watching The Force Awakens, of course, The Force Awakens kind of follows the template of A New Hope quite closely. But I'm really hoping they kind of veer off that path and go in a very different direction, which I think they will. I think they will go in a very different direction for Episode 8 and not follow the template of Empire Strikes Back. Because if they follow the template of the original trilogy, people are going to kind of be like, oh, okay, we get it. It's okay to do that with The Force Awakens and kind of revive that nostalgic feel. But now it's time to move into new realms and new ideas of how this storyline can go. Because if it's just a rehash of Empire Strikes Back, no one's going to care. But anyway, yeah, like I said, this video is not as in-depth as the prequel video because what can you really say about the original Star Wars trilogy? Unless you're sitting here bashing these films, the only thing you're going to do is sit here and say good things about it, and it's just going to be all of us who like the films sitting here agreeing like, yes, it is a really good film, So it's easier to defend something or critique something than it is to just say, isn't this great? Because really, I mean, I could do this video in like 5 seconds and just hold these up and go, they're amazing, watch them. And that's, I mean, really, at the end of the day, that's all I've done in however many minutes I've been sitting here talking about this. I think they're great films. I think even though he was robbed a little bit of his character development, I think Han Solo has great character development, even leading into The Force Awakens, which, again, expands the Star Wars universe and kind of enriches it in a way that the prequels, aside from Episode 3, the prequels really didn't do. By having this... I don't want to give too many spoilers away for Force Awakens, but there's three dynamics, really, that Han Solo deals with in The Force Awakens, and it really kind of enriches that character. And Luke Skywalker, he's our plucky hero. Nothing really changes for him. Leia's a weird character because she has a lot to do, but doesn't really change all that much. It's like she has lines, but it's not like Rey in The Force Awakens, where Rey is a much more fully realized character. In the first in A New Hope, she was a damsel in distress until you got to her, and then you realize, oh shit, she can handle her own stuff, And that was kind of revolutionary for the time, And then the rest of the movie is just kind of, well, actually, Empire Strikes Back kind of puts her in that damsel in distress role again. It's not really until the end when they're trying to take Han away on the Slave One that she really starts, grabbing a blaster and handling her shit again. And then, of course, in Return of the Jedi, she handles her shit as well, in Jabba's palace and on Endor itself. But in terms of character development, her character really kind of is in the same place because, of course, the galactic politics have changed a bit. She's kind of in the same place that she was in the first film. You know what I mean? Maybe that's just me, and don't take it to me, me making a sexist comment here. But I was always a little disappointed with Leia's development. But I think The Force Awakens brings new avenues to explore this character. She definitely doesn't have the change that Han or Luke does, because in the beginning Luke's just a farm boy. At the end he's a powerful badass Jedi. That's a journey. Leia doesn't really have that, I don't feel, and neither does Chewbacca. Poor Chewbacca. I don't know. I'm rambling now. Anyway, the original Star Wars trilogy. If you guys have not watched these films, I really hope you didn't watch this video, because I kind of gave away some key plot points. But I don't, it's kind of like me sitting here and talking about like just classic films that are amazing. It's so difficult to talk about something you kind of love, because for some reason my brain says these people already know that these are good films. Why do I need to sit here and talk 15-20 minutes about them? But I started this video series, and by God, I'm going to end it. And I guess this will be the end of it. So anyway, guys, the original Star Wars trilogy, yeah, just a huge part of my childhood and part of my identity. And there's a reason why this series is as loved as it is, and it's because it's a good classic tale of good and evil. And with the addition of the prequels, how sometimes good can lead to evil, and how those things kind of flip-flop depending on your point of view, a certain point of view, as a wise old wizard once said. But anyway, I think that is it for this video. Can't really think of anything else to talk about these movies, because like I said, I feel like when it comes to the original trilogy, everyone's pretty much on the same page, that they're just fantastic. And yeah, I don't know what else to say about them. So anyway, guys, that's it for this video. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time.